Good afternoon, everybody. Uneducated Economist. A lot of people talk about the idea that the rich elite or whoever out there, the powers that be, will have you owning nothing and you'll be happy. Now, I think about that a little bit, and I don't really need to own anything. Like, people seem to think that they need to own something. They need to own a nice car, they need to own a big house, they need to own, stuff. And I don't really feel like I need to own anything. Like, I feel anything that you have ownership to is something that can either be taken from you or needs to be maintained in one way or another. I don't want to own anything, but I do want to be happy. So when I hear you'll own nothing and be happy, that sounds okay to me. Now, granted, I do want my farm. I used to have a hobby farm when I was younger. I would like to have that back. I enjoyed raising animals, having chickens and goats and ducks and raising a garden. These are the things that I really enjoyed doing when I was younger. But I don't need those things in my life. It was just something that I enjoyed doing. Really, all I need is an income. What I need is food. What I need is shelter. But after that, I don't need anything. But I would really like to be happy. So to own nothing and be happy sounds just fine to me. But I don't think owning nothing has been part of the plan from the beginning. I just think it's always the way it was. Like, a lot of people say, you won't own anything, you won't have anything. I was like, well, I'm pretty sure you'll have clothes. You'll have your clothing. And you'll probably have cars. I mean, I can't imagine like they'll take all your cars away. I mean, some people might not want to own cars. I don't really want to own a car. I mean, I would like to have a nice car, but I want a nice car for like 10, 15 minutes out of the day. The rest of the time, I don't care about a car sitting in a parking lot. I want a car to drive. So if a car shows up one day and takes me to work, I'm cool with that. I don't need to own that vehicle. Don't get me wrong. I like driving a nice car around. But again, it's only for 10 or 15 minutes out of the day. After that, I don't really care. So I think about this essay from Cantillon. This thing was written back in the 1700s. And we have gone through the chapters one by one, starting, at the beginning of the essay. And we're up to chapter 12. And chapter 12 is titled, All Classes and Individuals in the State Subsist or Grow rich at the expense of the property owners. So all classes and individuals in the state subsist or grow rich at the expense of the property owners. Well, I think about that. How many property owners are there really out there? I mean, you got like a property owner, like say somebody who owns a house. But unless that house is like a rental income, if it's just your place of residence, that's not really being a property owner. I mean, yeah, it is a piece of property, but it's not really providing you with anything that's going to give you like an income. A property owner in Cantillon's day, what he was talking about is somebody who has a vast amount of land. And with this land, he can lease it out to farmers or hire farmers or, have farmers who work for him. Ultimately, with all this land, the land itself can produce. And the production from that land is ultimately belonging to the property owner. But that property owner must share some of that wealth from the production of his land in order to have the inhabitants to do the production, because he can't do it on his own. So the property owner has an expense that comes from having the inhabitants who then farm his land and produce on it. And that's ultimately what Cantillon's chapter is describing, is that all the inhabitants and everybody within the land, anything that they acquire from that land comes at the expense of the property owner. And the property owner must share that wealth with those inhabitants, or else he wouldn't have them there, and therefore he wouldn't have any wealth to begin with. So it's somewhat of a symbiotic relationship. Now, listen to what he describes here. There are none but the prince and the property owners who live independent. All other classes and inhabitants are hired or are entrepreneurs. If the prince or property owner closes their estates and will not allow them to be cultivated, it is clear that there would neither be food nor clothing for any of the inhabitants of the state. Consequently, all individuals of the state are supported not only by the product of the land that is cultivated for the benefit of the owners, but also at the expense of the same owners, whose property they derive all they have. So that's something to think about when people think you'll own nothing and be happy. I think that's the way it's always been. I don't think anybody has really ever owned anything. A little house on a little piece of property that does not produce anything is not really property ownership. It's property occupation, because you just get to happen to sit on that little piece of property. Unless you happen to figure out a way to make that little piece of property produce more than what you are putting into it, then you're not really a property owner. You're just occupying the land and it's costing you to do it. You have to make a production someplace else, whether have a job or, some sort of other income. But if you can make that piece of property work for you and produce an income of some sort that can pay for the property itself, well, then you would be a property owner, in my opinion. Listen to this here. He goes on. This thing is really long, but I just have a few things in here that I really liked, really thought was interesting. Okay. If the property owner only had enough land for one farmer, the farmer would get a better living out of it than the owner would. You think about that for a second. So this property owner, if he only had enough property that he could, pretty much hire one farmer or have one farmer on his property, that farmer would do better than he would. That's okay. Anyway, let me continue on here. However, the nobles and large property owners in the city sometimes have several hundred farmers, and thus there are very few owners in proportion to all the inhabitants of the state. This is written back in the 1700s. It said, back then, it was economic theory, that there was going to be a lot of land, a lot of people on the land, and very few owners of that land. And I don't think anything is going to change about that. Let me see. I think there was one other thing I wanted to read here. I think it was the last chapter. Let me read this to you. Thus, need and necessity enable farmers, artisans, and every kind of merchants, officers, soldiers, sailors, domestic servants, and all other classes who work or employed in the state to exist. All these working people serve not only the prince and the property owners, but each other as well. Many of them do not work directly for the property owners, and so it is not seen that they subsist on the capital of the proprietors and live at their expense. As for those whose professions are not essential, like dancers, actors, painters, musicians, etc., they are only supported in the state for pleasure or ornamentation, and their number is always very small compared to the population. It was a pretty interesting chapter to think about, because when I hear people say you'll own nothing and be happy, or, when the rich elite will say that's what's going to happen with the people, I honestly think that's the way it's always been. Uneducated Economist, you guys let me know.